I'm Gideon Yago, and today we are coming to you guys from the control room of the Newseum here in Washington, D.C., possibly the only place more obsessed with the news business than we are. Today, we are going to take a look at news of the world, or at least how headlines breaking outside of the U.S. borders make their way back here. First up, how does the truth get lost in the fog of war? One citizen journalist takes us inside the spin of a recent conflict to find out. This is the IFC Media Project.
21st century breakdown. I once was lost but never was found. I think I'm losing what's left in my mind to the 20th century deadline.
So chances are, if you grew up in the States between 1945 and 1991, your worldview was shaped by a very simple narrative. We'll call it the Rocky IV dynamic. In it, America and our allies are freedom-loving and good, and the Reds are totalitarian and bad. To a large extent, this gross oversimplification holds water after the Soviet Union collapses. The world realizes that people do in fact prefer McDonald's and blue jeans to police states and crap pop music. But that narrative and worldview is 18 years old. And even though the world has changed entirely, a lot of the storylines we use to cover it have not.
My name is Radmila Suleimanova. I was born in 1983, and I'm from the Caucasus Mountains region of Russia. When I was 8, the Soviet Union collapsed, and my parents came to America. I grew up in New York City, I went to journalism school, and I studied international relations at NYU. Last summer, as the world tuned into the Olympics, I was watching something else entirely.
Russia and the former Soviet satellite Republic of Georgia engage in hostilities over the independence-minded Georgian province of South Ossetia.
This is where I'm from, and I still have family there in Ossetia. So when news reported that Russia had invaded Georgia, I sat up and listened.
Russia invades one of this country's closest allies, the Republic of Georgia.
I fear Vladimir Putin is just getting started. He is showing aggression towards a young democracy like Georgia, a country that is named streets after our president.
The media made it sound like the Cold War was back on again.
Many fear that Russia is trying to send a message to other fledgling democracies in the region, that this is what can happen to nations that follow the West.
And Georgia's charismatic young president was dominating the 24-hour news cycle, pleading directly to us in English for help against the big bad Russian bear.
What we've been witnessing for the last days is a brutal, calculated, cold-blooded, premeditated murder by Russia of a small democracy on its borders.
But when I called my family in Ossetia, they told me a completely different story from what I was hearing in the American media. I decided I needed to find out what was really going on, so I booked a ticket. I was happy to see my family, but my visit was difficult. Hostilities had just ended and tensions felt high. I met many refugees who had lived through the war and had fled their destroyed villages in the south. I asked them what they saw and what they've been through. What I heard was something I hadn't seen on American television. They said Georgia had invaded first, that America's ally had launched an attack on their town in the middle of the night.
Конечно, по грузинской авианы стреляли. Нас мы это хорошо знаем.
Грузины танков стреляют, женщина и двое ребенка садились в семерку в машину и туда прямо их танков стреляли, они все танковые втроем. Я это своими глазами.
The story was more complicated than what the American media had made it out to be. I wanted to find out why they didn't tell the whole story. So when I got back to the US, I went to DC to talk to John Sawyer, who has reported a lot from Georgia. How do you think the US covered this war?
The initial coverage was very much pro-Georgian.
He told me that the US and Georgia have a very close relationship. Why? First of all, there's an all-important oil pipeline running through the country, bypassing Russia and Iran. And weeks after the conflict, the U.S. pledged $1 billion to the tiny country of Georgia. It is one of the top recipients of U.S. aid.
We had made this investment. We had put all this money into support of the Georgian military. They had sent their military to Iraq. They were our allies. And so it was not surprising that the media would fall into presenting it in that simple, straightforward way.
Today, we are all Georgians.
So Georgia is America's friend, and Georgia's president brought his case to the Americans for help. Fair enough. But I did a little research, and I found out that Georgia's government had hired a Belgian PR firm to craft that message specifically for the West. Governments hire PR firms all the time, but how does it work during a war? Here's Georgia's spin man, Patrick Worms, talking to me from Brussels.
You ready? When you're doing my job, your objective is always to make your client look as sympathetic as possible. Your job is to generate empathy for your client, especially in the middle of a crisis. Look at the map. Russia is the biggest country in the world. Georgia is a tiny place. It had no chance of winning a military conflict, and it knew it had no chance of winning a military conflict. The only chance that it had would be to get the world to become aware of what was going on and to get the world to intervene as quickly as possible.
But what about the truth? Aren't journalists supposed to know when they're being spun? I caught up with one of the world's most respected journalists, Christiane Amanpour, hoping she could make sense out of this.
I think there was a lot of propaganda, there was a lot of first instance reporting, and a lot of it turned out to be wrong. And the truth often is a casualty in the fog of war. That's no exaggeration and no secret.
Because of my experience in Ossetia, I don't watch news the same way now. Our media is too eager to tell the easy story. And because they don't look at all the angles, they can't give us the full picture. I've learned that if I want that, it's my responsibility to dig deeper.